We'll call the meeting to order. Council is conducting this meeting in person and via conference call in accordance with the Municipal Government Act, Section 199. Council chambers is now open for public attendance in person. However, councillors and members of the public may still join meetings remotely using our current teleconference process. If you have submitted a comment request, the chair will call on you at the appropriate time. The chair may also ask for comments and concerns from the public relating to a particular topic, and at this time, phone lines will be unmuted. If you would like to speak, please state your name. We ask that only one member of the public speak at a time. All persons will be allotted 10 minutes to speak as per our procedure by law. We ask that if the meeting recesses, that any callers hang up and call back in as the meeting reconvenes. This helps with call quality. Please note this call is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website and/or social media. To eliminate background noise, please mute your phone during the meeting. Everyone has a right to be present at council meetings and council committee meetings. Any attendees that are considered disruptive to the progression of this meeting may be removed at the discretion of the chair as per the Municipal Government Act, Section 198. We thank you for your cooperation and understanding. We have an agenda before us. Does anybody have any additions or changes?
Good morning, Reeve. Brian from Administration. Just one addition in-camera item, Councillor Code of Conduct, and hoping to schedule that for a 1:30 time slot. Thank you.
Any other additions or changes?
Just a question to Brian, is this a new one?
No, it's
Okay,
just the...
good enough.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other changes or additions to the agenda?
I think I might have my dates mixed, but I made a motion and I rescinded it. I don't see it in the minutes. Was that on the 22nd?
Yes, we can address that when we go to the minutes. We'll just finish the agenda first. Any other additions or changes to the agenda? If not, a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Also move.
Councillor Laprise has moved. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We have the minutes circulated from the regular council meeting for March 22nd. Any errors or omissions? And Councillor Kester has asked, I do recall there was a motion. I think it was under... It was in addition to the agenda.
So that motion was withdrawn, and then I believe that motion was going to be brought back at a future date. So the minutes don't reflect a withdrawn motion because it's not voted on, it's not defeated or carried. So like any motion would just need to be like added or like a notice of motion or any kind of procedural stuff that way.
Okay. And then just a note, we did pass a motion. Sorry, I should have noted the number. It was regarding that bridge letter in a meeting. We had passed a motion ratifying attendance for Councillor Laprise and I at a meeting on March 29th. The meeting it was rescheduled to March 28th, the day prior to what we had done the motion for. Does anybody have an issue with us just switching the date, or would you like a new motion? Does anybody? It's just a change of dates. Does anybody object?
I'm fine with the date change.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes if there's no errors or omissions.
So moved.
Deputy Reeve Clausen has moved. All in favor? Motion is carried. We also had the minutes from the public hearing for bylaw 2021-31.
So moved.
Councillor Kester has moved to approve. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We also had the minutes from the public hearing for bylaw 2021-34.
Also move.
Councillor Bigger has moved to approve the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We have a 9 a.m. Budget presentation. Good morning.
Good morning, Council. My name is Nikki Bishop, and I am the Manager of Financial Services. And I'm delighted to be here today to present the 2022 Operating and Capital Budget. Now, this presentation will take approximately 20 minutes, and it's just meant to be a high-level overview of key aspects of our budget that we feel that you need to know. So this is an updated presentation since our interim budget in the fall. So a lot of these slides will look familiar to you. And so it's really just meant to be a refresher. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions and dialogue at the end. So getting started, here we have our budget process. Now this likely looks familiar to you. We are at step 8, the final budget presented to Council. And then if Council approves, at the end of this meeting, the budget will be approved as step 9 for the 2022 budget year. One thing I'd like to just point out is that the strategic plan is really what underpins the budget process, and it is something that we consider in financial services in all of our procedures and our processes. One key aspect of the strategic plan is the sustainable organization component. And this is something in terms of financial sustainability that really matters to financial services. And you'll see this theme within the budget presentation today. So I'll start with the operating budget, and I'll start at the top with revenue. So this table here shows our full tax revenue from all sources, and really the blue bar is our taxes collected and the orange bars are our other revenues. And some key things to note here is just a context of a number of years over time. Previously, the taxes collected, historically where we've been and where we plan to go. So we can see, walking through this chart, we can see that our actual tax revenue in 2019 was 0.8% lower than the prior year. Moving forward, in 2020, our tax revenue decreased by 4.4% since the prior year. In 21, it decreased by 2.5% since the prior year. And now today for the 2022 budget, we are recommending a 1.1% tax revenue increase over the 2021 actual tax revenue levels. And then as we move forward and look ahead, we do see a 2% forecasted tax revenue increase. And this is a typical growth increase when it comes to forward-looking years. But that is something that we would decide at a future date. And so looking at this tax revenue in dollar form, there's some key things that I'd just like to point out and draw your attention to. In 2024, we forecast our tax revenue to be approximately $41.6 million. But if we look back to where we've been, back in 2019, our tax revenue was $42.4 million. And what that implies is that we actually will not recover our 2019 tax revenue levels until after 2024. So this is just something to keep in mind as we consider financial sustainability going forward. So let's just step back and look at the broader picture outside of Wheatland County. There are external factors that affect the county, and one of the key ones is inflation. So if we look at what the Bank of Canada has stated historically our inflation rates have been, and where the Bank of Canada is stating that we're going to go, we can see that in 2019, the inflation was approximately 2%. In 2020, as we move forward to the right, we can see that inflation rose by 0.7%. And now the Bank of Canada stated that it was 3.4% in 2021, and going forward, 4% in 2022, and 2.4% in 23 and 24. Now, these are forecasts by the Bank of Canada, and so as those numbers become, as they become aware or as they become realized, we can see the actual inflation values. So something you may have heard recently is that from February 2021 to February of 2022, the Bank of Canada recognizes that inflation rose by 5.7% year over year. So what this equates to is actually a weaker spending power in our dollars. And now the blue line in this graph is really our revenue levels over time that have brought forward. And we can see that our revenue decreased from 2019 to 2020. We can see the decrease from 2020 to 2021, and that spread between revenue inflation and inflation equates to just a weaker ability in our spending power here at the county. So looking at our revenue streams, it's broken out into two main chunks. In the green text, you'll see that all the classes of our property taxes are noted, whether it's residential, machinery and equipment, and commercial. And then at the top, we have a portion of all of our other revenue breakdowns. So this is something that you're all aware of, and it's just an easy visual of, where all our dollars are coming from. And if we were to make this even more simple, really the big chunk of our revenue comes from taxation, with the remaining portion coming from other revenue sources. If we were to break down other revenue even further, we can note a few key aspects of our revenue portion. The one thing in particular is our transfer from reserves. So we do have specific transfers that come into our operating budget that flows into certain items. One of them, I believe, is the housing project, which was, I believe, approximately $900,000. Another one is fire funding. So we do have initiatives that flow out of reserves into our operating budget that funds the initiatives that council approves. Other items to note, just penalties and interest, permitting grants, user fees and recoveries. These are all aspects of our other revenue. Again, it's only 15% of the inflows of dollars into the county. And this is just a high-level, simple slide that just denotes the recommendation of financial services today, just that the budget dollars in 2022 will have a variance from 2021 in the amount of approximately $445,000. And this is primarily due to the policing requisition. And I'll dive a little bit more into that in a little bit. So this is a great chart. Again, just a visual and just a refresher. This is where all of our dollars are going each year, and we can see some trends. The orange bar is our community and development services. So just as a refresher, that's all of our emergency management, peace officers, fire, economic development, etc. And then in the gray bar is our corporate and financial services, being our taxation, legislative, administration, assessment, and safety. And last but not least, our last bar there is the yellow bar that denotes all of the public works initiatives that are implemented, our fleet, storm drainage, water, waste, solid waste management, sewer, ASB, and facilities. And this is another great chart that just shows the breakdown of our spending dollars in percentage form. So you can look at this chart as though it's each bar is its own pie chart. So it's just giving you a visual of where the big dollars are spent. And primarily the gray area is our taxation. And that's just the inflows and the outflows of a lot of the requisitions that the county remits. And then the public works section is another section that a lot of our dollars actually does flow into. And this operating budget, expense by object type. Now this is an interesting chart, and I'd just like to point a few things out about it. At the top left, you'll see donations and funds transfers. And so that is our Community Enhancement Regional Board grant fund. Moving forward to the right, we can see in orange the donations, 4%. That is, what's included in that is the Wheatland Housing Management Body, our village funding initiatives, and the Town of Strathmore's shared use agreement. moving forward to the right, funding other associations and organizations. That's primarily our fire funding, both their operations and capital programs. And then moving down to the other section, that's 5% there in green. That's going to be primarily the engineering work that's expensed in our operating budgets. It's equipment rentals, and it's also gravel crushing expenses. And then last but not least, you'll see in the gray there in the top right, it says fuel at 4%. I'd just like to note that in 2021, our fuel costs were $1.6 million. And in the budget this year in 2022, we anticipate our fuel costs, that'll be about $2.1 million. So there's, $2.2 million. So there's approximately $600,000 in an additional impact due to the cost of fuel increasing. And then, of course, last but not least, workforce costs and requisitions, those we're aware of, and then transfer to reserves. This is our requisition slide excluding education. So it's just meant to give you a year-over-year sight line to what the dollar impact is for each of our requisitions. And so you'll see in blue that's 2019, in orange is 2020, and so forth. And so nothing really significant here to note except for the police funding. As that funding program started in 2020, we're seeing the uptick as part of that program. And again, another requisition we're all aware of, the education requisition. The county does collect these dollars on behalf of the province, and then we remit the requisition costs to the province once a year. So all in all, that is the end of the operating portion. Again, it's just meant to be a high-level review and refresher since the interim budget. And now I'll just quickly dive into the capital program. So as a refresher, these are the types of projects that we include in our capital program. It's going to be our roads, whether paved or unpaved, sidewalk replacements, bridges, all things water and sewer, wastewater servicing, storm drainage, vehicles, machinery and equipment, fire response, building, land acquisitions, land improvements, recreation facilities, other initiatives like the Tier 1 signage, and of course, our broadband initiative. So where have we been? So our capital program in prior years has been rather healthy. In 2019, it was $42 million. However, actuals came in at $22 million. So although that was before my time, I can assume that projects were either canceled or delayed in that year. In 2020, with the onset of COVID, we budgeted $15 million and actuals came in at 11. And then in 2021, we budgeted $21 million and actuals came in at 13. And now looking forward, if we look at the big picture and step back again, our capital program has changed over the years. In 2017 to 2019, we averaged over 40 million. And then looking to 2022, this year we anticipate a 19 million capital program. And going forward, it ranges from 16 to 34 million. And one thing I'd like to just draw your attention to is that our 5-year capital program is $125 million. So where is all that money being spent? In 2022, there are a lot of smaller initiatives, but still all very important. The key expenditure in 2022, I'm going to say that a lot. The public works, bridges, general construction, and road maintenance. There's a large initiative in this year in one area, and that's where we're seeing the greatest impact for this current year. So this is a table that's just meant to draw your eye to the most significant projects that will hit 2022. These are all projects that are over 300,000 here at the county. And again, as I said in the last slide, this one key project for 4.9 million, the Range Road 205, that's their greatest impact and our greatest project here at the county in this year. Zooming out and looking forward over the 5-year capital program, This table just isolates all programs or projects that are over $1 million, and then the anticipated year that we expect to see the significant cash outflows for those initiatives. So some key items I'd like to just draw your eye to. In emergency management, we have the Wheatland West Fire Hall construction. That's going to be $4.5 million. Our public works and bridges have a number of initiatives that range over $4 million and up to $10 million. And then moving forward, we have the Public Yards Master Plan of $4.4 million, West Side Servicing of $15 million, and the Broadband Initiative, of course, for $11.4 million. Now, again, in 2022, we have one project that will really hit our books. However, in the future years, it's really 2023 that we'll really start to see the significant outflow as we implement these capital programs. So you'll see in the package today, we have a capital report, and at the top of the capital report, we have a capital funding inflows, and then at the bottom it shows expenditures, and at the very bottom it breaks out our funding sources. And so this table is that funding source at the bottom, and the blue line reflects the total cost of all expenses related to our capital program in each year. And if you recall, the total cost of that whole 5-year program is $125 million. Now we can look at the funding sources and make assumptions about what we think will actually come in. We could say we might get some funding from the federal government, the provincial government, and while that's all fantastic, we really are at the mercy of their decisions for their programs. And then if we also consider other funding options, we could sell assets and then take funds from unrestricted surplus. However, we do need to consider that the total future reserve funding and or long-term debt requirements will be approximately $81 million. So we need to also consider, as stated earlier, part of our financial sustainability is understanding that these forecasts do not hedge against inflation. These are today's dollars. Also, as we build out our asset management plan, we do anticipate to get better sight lines into our assets that need to be retired. And then as well, the MSI capital program is ending in 2024. We do anticipate that program to be replaced by something else, but that's to be determined. So overall, things again that we consider as part of our strategy and sustainable financial responsibility. We consider CPI, and we consider the impact of inflation. Again, 2021 February to 2022 in February, the inflation numbers were 5.7%. We do hope that will come down to more normal levels by the end of the year. We also consider our future capital projects that need to be funded, and a portion of them can be funded through grants. However, the remaining balance gets funded through reserves and or long-term debt. As we build out our asset management program further, we will understand the asset deficiency that we have here at the county, and we'll be able to isolate the assets that need to be replaced. And this is a normal process in the asset life cycle. And as projects come online, we do anticipate that our assessment base will grow. However, there is a lag in that, and we're not totally confident in when the county will see the benefits of those projects coming online. And another thing to remember is that municipalities are not allowed to run budget deficits, and the amounts of debt that can be incurred is limited. The county is required to stay within specific ratios. And last but not least, we want to prevent any large tax increases in any one given year. And this is really part of sustainable tax rates. Some of you may have heard that Chestermere raised their tax rates by 10%, Cochrane, my apologies. And so these are things that we just want to consider over time. Certainly a more palatable increase would be 1.5% over numerous years rather than, a large chunk in any one year. So again, our intent is to just provide you with the information of what you need to know. Ultimately, all decisions come down to council and the strategy of council. And And this is just based on financial services information and our intent to maintain financial sustainability, which is part of our strategic plan here at the county. And at this time, that's the end of this presentation, and I will call on Brian or Joel to help with any questions. So this is my first year at the county, but it's open for discussion.
Any questions from council regarding the budget presentation? And thank you, Nikki. That was great. Councillor Kester.
Yeah, good morning. It's not so much as a question, but there's been comments lately I've been hearing we're spending so much on agriculture. And I see on the slides there, transportation, agriculture, the highest spending thing. But when I look through the rest of the budget, I don't see anything on agriculture. So I'm thinking that's where they're getting how much we spend on agriculture. I'm wondering if we could put agriculture in a different place besides transportation, because I think it is deceiving.
Yes, for sure. And that would just be clarity in the budget. Agriculture is relatively a smaller line item in our budget. You have staffing, board per diems, and regular stuff, meals, training, all that kind of stuff. But it definitely would be deceiving just based on kind of where it is grouped right now. And the reason why it would be is just because transportation and agriculture report to the same general manager, so that would be the intent. Definitely not the intent of management to kind of do that, but we can definitely break that one out in the future. Thank you.
Would it be possible when you break it out, because I know a lot of the agriculture is funded by provincial grants that are quite predictable, they go in cycles. So yeah, just to make it clear, we're not spending our net amount, I think would be the most appropriate, because it is so heavily funded. It would make it much like FCSS then. We give a little bit, but the FCSS budget is a lot bigger.
Yes, and there are I believe two major grants that we receive for ASB. The two of them off the top of my head, I don't know the names of, but I know one is an operating grant, and I think it's around $150,000 a year. Then there's another one for, I believe it's $74,000 a year. I just don't know the name of that grant off the top of my head, but I do know that the grant funding in total is around $250,000 for that.
Yeah.
And it is a substantial amount of the actual program costs.
For sure. I think it's for environmental enhancement. I don't know the name either, but it's for those types of projects. Off-site watering and some.
Other questions for administration?
No question, just comment. It was very well put together. Just wish we had a money tree on here somewhere, but we don't.
Yes.
How do we plant those?
Yeah, excellent presentation. Thank you. Yeah, I liked it. Great information.
Any other questions? I do have a question. I'm just trying to find the document. In our budget discussion, I'll just show you so it's more clear because I don't know what to call it. In this, there was like just some projections based on potential capital spending. Can you, and I don't know if you have it handy, there was a forecast for starting point to end of 2022 with no changes. And then from that, there was like an estimate to the change in reserves. Do you know what the difference with the recommended tax rate to those change in reserves, like what that difference would be with the recommended tax change versus with option 4 with no tax change?
So that difference would be around $480,000. So it still isn't significant. the projected tax increase right now is very minimal. It's probably 75% of inflation. Just with council direction, that has been kind of brought forward. We do understand that council wants to either keep the tax rate the same or very low. Just from an administrative standpoint, it is very difficult. We have been doing it kind of year over year, and we've actually handed out a kind of a summary for all of council that they just received this morning. And this is just a super high level kind of indication of where the taxation has gone over the last, I'd say, 4 years. And it was also covered in that budget presentation. So this is just kind of considering the municipal tax only. So what's happened just year over year? In 2018, it went up 1.5%. In 2019, it stayed relatively the same. 2020, the county and kind of everyone was just dealt a different hand with COVID, and we understood the importance of reducing taxes at that point. So we actually went down 5.2% overall. And then in 2021, we kind of kept that same number because I know council is also working to be in line with the provincial government and also considering the needs of ratepayers as well. So we also reduced it by 3.3% that year as well. So what we are hoping is to kind of just bring it up a little bit. And Nikki did a great job in her presentation, just kind of noting that we're still not even back to, even with this potential 1.2 or 1.1% tax increase, that we're still not even close to being back to the 2019 numbers. So sorry, and that was a long-winded answer, but to answer your question, the impact on reserves would be just about $480,000 extra, or $440,000, one of the two.
If I can make another clarity as well. When I spoke to the 1.1 increase in our budget over prior year, I was comparing our budget to actuals. And then in the RFD, we compare budget to budget, which is where the 1.2% comes from. So that's just the difference.
Thanks. Just want to talk about the capital side and the major project that we have, 205. That one there, I'm just trying to refresh my memory. Was that for oil and gas? We were upgrading that road?
We have the 50% grant from GOA on that one.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
On Range Road 205, because it's such a large budget item, I just wanted to make sure that was the one that's for oil and gas upgrade, basically.
Yes, it is. So we did receive a STIP grant for that.
Okay.
And I don't know the exact amount of that grant, but I believe it was around 50%. I'd have to take a look back at our records, but we have received, we've definitely received some funding. Our deferred revenue is actually up because we have received a good chunk of that STIP funding already. Okay. But it is for oil and gas, and it's to reconstruct 205. And it's to take out, I know part of it is to shave off a big hill on 205 as well, right at the end there, but.
And that grant funding is tied to that particular project.
Very specific to that, and it's kind of at a point where it's at a point of no return. We've already, I think, got all the landowners signed up. I think we've done some preliminary work too. So,
well, just in the last year, the whole environment has changed on that industry. So I just want to make sure we're not going to put a bunch of money in a road that may not be utilized fully in the future. That's all. Thanks for the answer.
So for council's options, administration has presented a recommendation. There are also options on page 15, and there is option 4 does include approving with an amendment to reduce the property tax and reduce the transfers to reserves for the offsetting reduction in tax revenue, or the recommended action does include as presented with that increase that Nikki just walked us through. So council's wishes.
I'll move that council approve the 2022 to 2024 final operating budget as presented.
Councillor Laprise has moved the recommendation to approve as presented. Open the floor to council discussion. No discussion?
I thank you very much for that very good presentation. I'm still struggling with the fact that I believe we are about to turn a corner. I believe that all the hard work the county and administration has done with business and our tax relief bylaws and that kind of is going to pay dividends. I would like to see that we hold the line on. In fact, I like option. I like option 4. It's a temporary thing. It goes from year to year. We're not going to say we're going to do it. Although I'm not a real fan of dipping into reserves. The reserves were there because we have changed. We have, if you want to look at it, the harshest way you can look at it is we have taken more money from our ratepayers over the past years than we have provided services for. And I think that I just think about the message that it shows that we are trying to cut our tax rates, and we are trying to get more bang for the buck, and we've done a wonderful job. And this will be mostly ceremonial. It'll be optics. Most of the ratepayers in my area their tax, no matter what happens, will go up because the assessments have gone up. So, but the fact that we are sitting and holding the line, I think that shows something. So, I prefer option 4. So, what happens if I don't agree with option number 1? I guess. Okay.
Are you asking what happens if you don't agree?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a motion on the floor, so we can debate, and then it will be council's decision. Other questions or discussion?
I believe management's 1.2% tax increase is the best option. It shows our ratepayers that we are not going to dip into reserves for operating. Our ratepayers know there's 5% tax in our inflation increases, and we're only doing 1.2%. I think if anybody's looking at our budget, any businessman, and a 1.2% in this time would show them that we're being fiscally responsible and not dipping into reserves. And just because we think brighter days are coming, wait till the brighter days come before we spend any of that money. We can't take money from reserves hoping that brighter days are coming. No, I can't. I just can't do that. For me, operating is operating, and we have to collect the taxes for that. If you wanted to lower the taxes more, cut some more stuff out of the budget. I'm sorry, I can't handle anything coming out of reserves for operating. It's just fundamentally wrong for me. My ratepayers would not like that at all.
Other questions or discussion? Deputy Reeve Clausen.
From my division, looking at this budget, I have similar issues with Tom because of the location of the property values. The biggest assessment increase will be in my division, I'm sure, overall because of location. So regardless of what happens, these people will be paying more on their tax bill. So I would like to try to go with option 4, but I understand there's a motion on the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I'm looking at it as there was reserves put aside for hard times, and I think these are them. Assessment will go up. People will be paying. And with a 5.7% inflation, I just don't think we need to add to it. I think we are at a tipping point, and I'm looking at it as an investment. So I'm with option 4.
A question for clarification to administration. In terms of reserves for this year, with option 4, would that actually require a withdrawal from reserves, or would that just decrease the transfer to reserves from this year's operating budget?
Yes. So anything in the budget at this point, all of the budgets that are presented to council will have all transfers in of excess operating funding. And then that operating funding, the transfers in would be transferred out for capital. So that's the big piece why these budgets are so intertwined together. So in both scenarios, money goes in the operating and comes out for capital. So the other factor that we have as well is what capital projects do go forward. So you'll notice in that capital presentation that just got put forward by Nikki that the budget always was higher than the actual. So last year we were probably the most accurate that we have been in a long time, and it was still out by, I'm going to say 6 million, which was a significant amount. The reason why that was out by 6 million was because Range Road 205, there was just a delay. We couldn't go forward with the whole thing back in 2005, we couldn't go forward with 205 in 2021. So hence the big discrepancy on the spending. So in a perfect world, all of our projects would go forward and they'd be on or lower than budget. And that's just the other factor that administration just doesn't have a crystal ball on that. You know, some products have been getting delayed due to COVID, supply chain issues and stuff like that. Anything over budget needs to come back to council for approval. So that's one control that we do have in place. And with our financial analyst back full time at the county, we'll be able to bring back more robust financial reporting to council in the future as well. And if there was any issues, administration would bring them up anyways.
So in terms of, because I've had some discussions with ratepayers as well about this budget and our upcoming tax rate bylaw, is it accurate? And I recognize that we are transferring funding out of reserves for capital projects this year, as we do, and as our reserves are set up for. If we were to contemplate reducing the property taxes collected, essentially that wouldn't necessarily be withdrawing from reserves. It would be reducing the amount that we would be transferring to reserves for this year. Like, we wouldn't be dipping into reserves for operating, but we would be reducing the amount that we are putting into reserves for future asset management or future capital projects. Or
yes, there's kind of two ways to look at it. That is definitely one way to look at it. So it would just be a transfer of less in,
right.
And even resolution 4 speaks to that, the option provided to council. So what it is just a decrease of transfers to reserve, and then a decrease of taxation revenue. So it's kind of lots of ways to kind of look at it. Ultimately, there would just be less taxation revenue flowing into the county. And then there is one control that council ultimately does decide as well, and that is asset replacement. It's kind of a slippery slope, especially because we don't know our full asset liability without the full build out of our asset management program. So just kind of items for council to consider during your deliberation. Thank you.
If council wanted to, or in the budget, I realize there's a surplus sometimes every year. Most years we do have a surplus. That surplus could be more defined, and council could make a decision with that surplus how much we want to use of that to cushion future tax increases. But without that information this year, I'm still back at the 1.2% increase. And as far as the property assessments going up, we're not increasing the mill rate, we're increasing the total taxation. So I would think across the board, assessments have gone up in residential, just because your division's got in rate increase. I'm sure every division. I haven't seen the and I'm thinking I still want to hold the line at 1.2, and the assessment is what it is. We just adjust the mill rates. For me, the mill rates is a deceptive number to think on tax increases or not. Some municipalities can increase the tax rate but lower the mill rate and say we're lowered the mill rate this year, we're doing great, but really it was because of the assessment. It's an optical, it's a shell game. So if we're not going to move as much money into reserves after we approve the reserve budget, it's still taking money out of the reserves totally. It's just the shell game. And I'm still going with the 1.2%, the motion as presented.
Yes, Councillor Larson.
I think this is, I'm kind of with Councillor Laprice and Kester on this. If we put this into a farming thing, I mean, every farmer knows that fuel's gone up, fertilizer's gone up, herbicide's gone up. That's going to be all part of their operating expenses this year. They understand that. And if you think of their reserves, that's the money they have to keep back because they have to buy a new combine someday and they have to buy a new tractor and a new seeder. If you take money away from what you need to do to keep your assets running, you can't run your farm anymore because your combine's wore out and you have no money to buy one because you didn't want to spend a little money doing something else. It's a bad idea to use reserves to cover things. We can, if we hit a turning point, we can always hold the line in the future, but I don't know that we want to base our decisions on what might come. I think we're better off to wait until the alleged windfall comes.
I agree. I just think that we need to look at our future funding for capital expenditures. So 2023, we're looking at 34 million, 25 million in 2024, 31 in 2025. I wouldn't want to whittle it away knowing that we have some, and I do think that our ratepayers want to see our infrastructure maintained. And I think a 1.2% shows that it's prudent, that it's not trying to keep pace with inflation. It's a moderate, very moderate and responsible increase. So I do still, and I agree that this world is so unpredictable that I don't think we should make any decisions on future assessments until they're closer.
I think this
Sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one more comment. It was mentioned there was a municipality has a 10% tax increase. If we keep whittling away, eventually some council here is going to be presented with the option of a huge tax increase. And that won't be their fault. Right? It's spending the reserves for something other than what they were gathered for. These reserves were gathered for future infrastructure needs, for when we get less ability to tax. And they're there. They're mostly spoken for road improvements and bridges. They're all spoken for, the reserves. We just don't have a pile of money there saying, oh, look at this pile of money. They're all named. They're in restricted reserves. So again, prudent management of a business does not take money from reserves for operating.
That's right.
You got to look at this as a business, and it's here forever. We're not going into retirement mode. We're growing. We're a young municipality. We got things, we got dreams, we got hopes, and it takes money.
Other questions or discussion? For myself, I've been debating this and researching and really trying to weigh the pros and cons of both the recommendation as well as option 4. For myself, I guess I would respectfully disagree just about the constraints on our use of reserves. We do have unrestricted reserves as well as restricted reserves that have been earmarked for projects. And I also recognize, I fully support the use of reserves, and I think that is a strong fiscal management strategy in terms of reducing the amount of money that we spend on large capital projects. We don't have to debt finance. Historically, we haven't done that. The debt that we do carry is more third-party debt that we have done for organizations in the community. And I recognize that we do have a significant asset management liability and responsibility for the future. But in terms of, I look at this both from like obviously a governance responsibility to the community for providing services, but also as a business. And I guess one factor that I do take into consideration and what I do hear when meeting with potential future developers is often tax rates do drive investment. And I think we don't have to look very far to see where, and there's certainly, I'll completely acknowledge there's factors beyond taxes, but at the end of the day, it's the bottom line. And there are multiple factors that influence that bottom line for both residential development and also non-residential development. But taxes are a key piece, and obviously one of the drivers that we control. We do control investment into infrastructure, which can make that investment possible as well. And so I'm balancing that because we do have some, I look at the West Side servicing and I see that as an important driver and potential investment as well. There are municipalities as well that do use reserves for tax stabilization and for things like just unexpected expenses as well. That could be unexpected capital expenses if you had like an emergency repair required or that type of thing. But I think one could argue that going through a pandemic and the geopolitical climate that we're in right now that's driving the inflation is also somewhat of an unexpected situation. Inflation, of course, is to be anticipated and expected, but there are municipalities that do increase their revenue through increased assessable value, so basically increased development versus increasing their mill rates. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a shell game. We control the mill rate, which if your property maintains its value or just increases, on an average, say with inflation or that type of thing. I know it's not really, that's not a great comparison, but if you are paying more taxes because your assessable value has gone up, that is because you are holding an asset that is worth more. That is not the county increasing your taxes. Assessment is highly regulated and done, very carefully and very accurately. What we do control is the mill rate, and I know we can look at the levy and we can look at the mill rate. I wouldn't say it's a shell game to focus on the mill rate, but that is something that we can control. Ponoka County actually hasn't raised, I believe, their mill rate since 2009, and their CAO said they haven't raised their residential rate in the 35 years he's been there, and they are maintaining their assets well. They've done that obviously because they have had growth in their assessment base. One of my goals is to maintain or reduce our tax rates so that we can drive more investment into Wheatland County, preferably industrial, preferably into our industrial areas. That non-residential tax rate will be a key consideration for that. But I'm also very mindful of our agricultural producers, our farmers and ranchers, and the pressures that they're experiencing this year. Input costs, the same fuel costs that we're experiencing, they're experiencing on the farm. Our commercial operators too. Scott was just talking about the impact of fuel prices to his business in a conversation this morning, and I know we have businesses across the county experiencing that. And I know we have our residential taxpayers experiencing that as well on different scales. I think it was Tom that said, like, I would not commit to this long term or as like a continuous practice to reduce the amount of levy that we're collecting or to not increase that consistently over the years. And I'm grateful that that was highlighted, but I would support holding the levy for this year, with a tremendous amount of thanks to our administration for the work that they have done on budgets. We are essentially doing the same or more with less when you take into account the inflation that we've experienced, as well as the increased requisition. That police requisition is significant. And initially, when we set our interim budget, I did agree to set a budget based on that increase, but at this point, my preference would be to see the reduced transfer to reserves for this year and have a good, strong look at our reserves in line with our asset management program as that is fleshed out through that work that's being done by our administration. I don't know exactly the timeline for that, but we will have a much better idea. I do have concerns about our asset management liability across the province. I'm hearing about issues with sustainable funding for bridges specifically, but also obviously with our transportation network, which we do invest heavily in. So I won't be supporting the motion that's on the floor, and that's my rationale. Any other questions or discussion?
Can I make one more point, I guess? So just in response to some things that you've said, I could see that investors might look at holding the line as being potentially irresponsible and unsustainable, and that, that's fine for this budget, but in future we may, there's always a potential that you've undercut too much and now you have to go a larger, like I would much rather do 1.1 and 2 and 2 than 5 or 4 or whatever. I do think that investors know that that taxes are taxes. They go up. Also, one other thing I'd like to just point out, I guess, that as a county, I think we made a decision to hire extremely qualified people running our administration, and I think we've paid for that experience and their advice, and I really think that we should be taking it more to heart, I guess. Those are my comments.
Any other questions or discussion?
Like a recorded vote.
Certainly. Just go into the capital budget. Slowly, because maybe I have it somewhere here. I guess one other thing just to keep in mind is when we were looking at the capital projects, sorry, I still haven't put my finger on them. There were, I think, obviously we will be having careful discussions around those capital projects that we have planned. Broadband just jumps out without looking. I believe we have $11 million budgeted between now and 2026, 11 point some million. We definitely have some latitude and some strategic decisions around whether we continue that commitment to that level of funding. The other thing, and I think our administration has done a really good job at looking at innovative ways of managing some of our transportation assets. I think it would be fair to say that a significant amount of that decrease has been just in reducing paving and with the trialing of the modifiable road oil. Obviously, we have more discussions to have around that, but I think we have preliminary results that show that that may be a good solution for a lot of our transportation needs. It's repairable by internal crews. It's a significantly lower cost option than paving. I think we have not had to ban the roads that we've piloted on, and it kind of solves that dust control issue where we have that interface of either agriculture and industry and our residential people on roads. I know Brian wants to speak to that.
No, the only thing I just wanted to give a friendly reminder that we do have a 10 a.m. appointment.
Oh, yes,
and it is
thank you.
10 a.m. and I think, yep, Sean's here.
Yes.
So, yep. Just as a
Perfect.
reminder.
Thank you so much. Anyways, I only raise that because, of course, we want to be investing in our infrastructure and maintaining that. And I think we have done an exceptional job, and we've done an exceptional job of creating reserves to do that as well. And I guess just the sort of about $500,000 reduced revenue that we would see without increasing the taxes this year. I do feel comfortable with that, and I feel like we can mitigate some of that through some strategic capital investment and in how we're managing that infrastructure. Any other questions or discussion?
I guess I understand what you're saying, Amber. I just, so a lot of, and I think it's always wise to always look for more cost-effective ways to do things. But the MRO project, I think, is in its early trial stage still. Again, I feel like we're putting a cart before the horse. Like I appreciate that we need to look at cost-effective ways of doing things, but sometimes you have to spend money on your infrastructure. That's just,
Absolutely.
I guess that's my point.
Yep, very fair for sure. Any other questions or discussion? We'll do a recorded vote. Reeve Link is opposed. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Great discussion, but I'm opposed. Thank you.
Councillor Laprise.
I'm for.
Councillor Bigger.
Opposed?
Councillor Eichert.
Opposed?
Councillor Kester.
In favor.
Councillor Laursen.
In favor.
Motion is defeated.
I'll move that the council approve the 2022 to 2024 final operating budget as presented with the following amendments: reduction of property taxes of $564,432 and reduced transfers to reserves for the offsetting reduction of in tax revenue. So that's option 4.
Questions or discussion on the motion?
Recorded vote, please.
Certainly. Reeve Link is in favor. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Laprise.
I'm opposed.
Councillor Bigger.
In favor?
Councillor Eichert.
In favor?
Councillor Kester.
Opposed.
Councillor Laursen.
Opposed.
Motion is carried. We do have a 10 a.m. appointment.
Reeve Link, sorry, just one maybe quick housekeeping item. I don't know if this will be quick for council, but just one further resolution just to approve the capital budget as presented.
Oh, yes, thank you.
I'll move that we approve the capital budget as presented.
Councillor Kester has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Sorry I missed that.
Can we have
We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll let the auditor get set up and reconvene at 10:09.
Thank you.
Good morning. We'll call the meeting back to order. I would like to welcome, I think, is it Sean? It is. Sean Pilling with MNP LLP. Good morning.
Good morning, Reeve and councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. Last couple of years, I think you just had the cyber voice, and I'm sure the voice and the image are significantly different, to say it. Anyway, it's my pleasure to be here with you today, and my intention really to cover off our audit findings. So just when I say our audit findings, when we do the audit, as you're well aware, we're not in here authorizing transactions or telling you when to record things or how to record things. Our job is to be objective and look at the financial information that's prepared for us to look at, come to a conclusion, and then report on our findings to you. So that's what I intend to cover off today. Now, I understand within your package, each of you has the similar information that I intend to go through. So my intention is really to cover off the audit findings from our perspective, hit a couple of highlights in there that are significant to you as council members, and then also to touch on some of the highlights within the financial statements themselves and what they could mean or what they do mean within a government set of financial statements. And the reason I emphasize a government set of statements is that the, and I realize I'm preaching to the converted here, just bear with me, but the government statements, your role is to provide a service to the community, right? Whereas a for-profit entity, its role is to provide a service or a financial result for the benefit of the shareholders, right? So there's a different objective in what's being done within the statements. Bear with me, I do need sips of water from shortly. Age is catching up with me, so just bear with me. So again, my intention is not to read this package to you. I mean, that'd be a waste of time. I'm just gonna hit the highlights, right? So the engagement status, we've completed the audit. Yep, there it is. We completed the audit. We're still just waiting on, as of last night, there was one legal confirmation that we had yet to receive. Through my discussions with Brian last night and again this morning, we've concluded that we don't need that confirmation. The issue that the lawyer would have been dealing with has already been dealt with by another lawyer. So not to worry about that, nothing to be concerned about. So I'm no longer waiting for any information. We are prepared to sign that off after review of the statements and your approval as council members. Our report will issue I know it's in there somewhere. It's considered an unmodified opinion, which previously used to be called a clean audit opinion or a good audit opinion. And they're within the package and the financial statements. You have a copy of the audit report. And again, not to read it to you, paraphrased, everything within the statements is stated fairly in accordance with the accounting standards for public sector. Well, everything's reported fairly in accordance with the public sector accounting standards that government is required to report to. So, some of the significant issues, and again, not to read this to you, just to touch on the highlights. Changes from the audit service plan, we would have provided a plan of what our approach was to the audit. At the beginning, these are the issues that we're going to cover off. This is why, here's what we're going to do about it. Nothing has changed within that plan, so we have carried out the plan. So as I say to my team, plan what to do what you planned. If you come across something you didn't know what to do with, plan what to do what you planned. So we've completed our plan there. Materiality. I think I've gone through this with you last year, but I will touch on it again. The materiality is a dollar figure that if you were investing in a company, and I heard that discussion earlier, if you were investing in a company and the statements were incorrect by this figure, it would change your decision. So when I say the materiality used is $1.1 million, for you and I, that's about 1.009. It's way too high for me, personally. But when you're dealing with a $37 or a $45 million operation, it's 4%. So it's, you've got, not that you have more leeway and you're going to drive by and say, yeah, that's good. But it's a big perspective. And then depending on the factor you're looking at, you will scope it down to focus on areas that could be some concern about them. In my experience as both an entrepreneur, a businessman, an auditor, it's usually the things that are different, unusual, or unexpected in operations that always cause questions. Day-to-day stuff, good to go. Not good to go, we still look at it. But it's those three different, unusual, unexpected that you're going to look at closer. One of my clients a number of years ago said, so that's the duh principle. Yes, it is. Different, unusual, unexpected, right? Anyway, the point being, we look at things that are new closer than when we look at the general operations. During our audit procedures, we report to you that there were no identified or suspected concerns about fraud. So everything is as you would expect. You rely on your people to do their work, and they do it well. And as I mentioned, nothing came to our attention that made us sit up and say, "Oh, okay, what's going on here?" Everything is on the right side. Compliance with laws. So we are, a couple of the laws and regulations that are required to be disclosed are within the statements, dealing with the debt limits and disclosure of compensation to council. Those are consistent year over year. The other one that we look, and we look at the other regulations as well. Are you following your bylaws? Are you charging the tenants or the residents your property taxes that you were just talking about a few minutes ago? Compliance with your bylaws. The change this year was now you've got a different type of investment. Does it comply with the MGA? And as I'm sure you've talked about it. So the Municipal Government Act says you can only invest in these types of investments. Basically, safe, secure, I'm not going to lose my shirt type of investments. You know, you're probably not buying Tesla that's up and down like a yo-yo, okay? And you're not, but you're complying with the regulations that are out there. And we conclude that you are complying with those. Related party transactions, nothing came to our attention that made us look into those any closer. Transactions are reported as you would expect them to be. Going concern, again, you're operating, continue to operate. You're talking about your operating budget for next year, your capital budgets. You're in a good position, and I'll highlight some of those things as we go through it in a bit. And your financial statements, the note disclosures and such that you would expect to see are consistently applied from year to year within the statements. Pardon me. This next section, these are significant risk areas. And again, these are basically the more significant areas that we look at when we do the audit. My intention, again, is not to review what they were. You have them all in front of you. That was the area, and the box to the right is how we responded to that to conclude that everything is reported properly in accordance with the accounting standards that you would expect. Other areas, independence. As auditors, we maintain our independence. As I mentioned earlier, we're not in here making decisions or being part of council to influence or sway a decision. We are objective. We're looking at what's there, whether it's authorized or not. That's what we're looking at. We're not here to evaluate whether you received good value for what you paid for. Okay, that's up to you and your finance team. But we're looking at, is it authorized to be paid? Yes, it is. Is it recorded in accordance with the accounting standards? Yes, it is. Okay. We have written representations that we request from management at the end of the audit, which basically summarizes everything that we've asked for that we needed. They've provided to us without any concern or delay in the overall process. The last item here was significant differences. So during the audit, I've seen some audits where we have a number of adjustments, and we did not have any significant adjustments that were made. There were a few that, as we went through, we said, okay, we're not sure about this piece. They went back to finance, they said, oh yeah, okay. And then they did the adjustment, here's what it was. Even with those changes, nothing was significant. So even if we had not made the adjustment, the statements would have been still presented fairly in accordance with the accounting standards. Okay, how do I change? to the statements here. Oh, too far. Some of you, okay, I need like one glass that focuses on this and one that I can see you with. I was going to, on the financial statements, I was going to jump to the statement of operations briefly. So the intention of this next part is just to review some of the highlights. And when you look at a set of statements, every set of statements tells a story, right? So once you know your perspective you're looking at and what you're coming from, then each set of statements will tell a different story about what's going on. Now, when I say story, I don't mean made up version. I mean, it tells what's gone on over the year, right? So starting with the statement of operations, and this is your operating budget, your capital budgets, things of that nature that go through here. Looking at, I'm jumping right to the bottom line here. So the operating income, or in this case, operating deficit of 8.4, that's before any transactions related to capital items, okay? So your true bottom line this year is a $2.9 million deficit, which is about, whatever that is, of 35 million. Can't even do math in my head today. It's a small number, okay? It still could be significant, because when you look at the prior year, you think, well, we went from a $20 million surplus to a $2 million deficit? Like, what happened? Did the train derail and everything blew up, or what? Not the case. Most of the capital stuff has a significant impact on your surplus. In the years when you build things or receive developments, or you receive lots of Muirfield, for example, they create a revenue stream, but the expense, when you first get them, is not in the expenses. It sits over on the balance sheet, right? So there's an absolute disconnect between I got something this year, or I got $1 million to build something this year, and I built it. So in the year that happens, you have a big surplus, and ignoring everything else, just focusing on that one piece. Every year after you have the asset, you'll have a deficit, which just flies in the face of for-profit. People think, that doesn't make any sense. That's the way government accounting works. Because remember, the goal is not to put cash in the shareholder's pocket. The goal is to provide a service over a long term. Right? So you've got assets, became equity, they're invested in capital assets. They go forward. Again, excuse me. No, it's not COVID. All right, so what's the significant changes this year? Pardon me, I'll step up to the mic again. Overall, your operations are fairly consistent. Year to year, there's 3 lines that have a big difference even relative to budget. Oops. I apologize, I can't do this part of it very well. User fees and sales of goods. Your budget was 2.3, actual was 4.5, last year was 2.2. What happened? That's your lake lots that you sold. Basically 1.9 million of that change is related to those lake lots. Now in this case, okay, so here's my revenue, great, but I had an inventory item. Where's the expense? The expense is down here in your subdivision, land and culture, and that line, land and development. So it increased from 1.5 up to 3.1. Again, approximately a $1.9 million change. So from one side, you got revenue of 1.9, you got expense of 1.9. Well, did you make anything? It was pretty tough during 21 because the world was locked down, right? But you covered off your costs, so you're okay with that still. As the retail market, now this is speculation. Okay, let me just clarify that. This is speculation that as your real estate market increases, your demand is going to go up and you should be able to generate some income from those lots as opposed to a break-even scenario. But it may also be a decision that you say, you know what, we have this for the benefit of our residents. We will have future tax base. We're going to sell it at cost. Again, decisions that you would make as council. Okay, the other significant line within the difference in the functions here is your roads and streets. Last year you had a $23 million cost. This year 25.2, and the budget was 24.7. Again, what's going on? This is mainly related to the construction, and my understanding is construction or maintenance of the roads for things that would have been deferred in 2020. You're back on the trail again in 2021, so you're getting everything back up to speed to where you expect it to be. So now you've got contractors, you've got the price of oil, asphalt, gravel, all those, and people to run your maintenance equipment, all of which add costs that everyone was on a bit of a lockdown in 2020. So in 2021, you got increased costs. So that's kind of the big picture of what's happening within the operations. Now again, the point I want to make here is that when you've got these types of surpluses or deficits during the year, it does not mean cash in the bank. To look at where you got from a cash perspective, I'll just go to your cash flow statement. And this takes into account the timing changes between when you get your grant monies, when you spend your grant monies, when you get your receivables from residents, when you pay your bills, right? So it eliminates all the timing stuff and says, okay, I started off with a $2.9 million deficit. What does that really mean from a cash perspective? And in this case, the operations section comes down to you generated 16.1 million of cash. Now generated might be an overstatement here. The result was, based on your timing of ins and outs, you have $16 million of cash that came in. Okay, so what did you do with that? Well, you built a bunch of assets, $12.8 million. When I say built, it could be roads, it might be buildings, it might be things that you capitalized. But you spent $12.8 million of that 16 on capital assets, and you sold a few as well. Some of your equipment you sold as well. And that put $3.7 million of cash back into your pocket. So your net out for your capital assets, 8.8. So just looking at those two, 16 in, 8 out, your $8 million cash generated, right? So again, paraphrasing back, your operations said we had a deficit. We take out the timing and say we have an $8 million surplus in cash. And now you have to factor in, okay, but we're planning for the future. This will bring in some of your reserves discussions. This will also bring in how do we maintain the infrastructure, how do we maintain equipment, buildings, things of that nature. So now you've got this cash, and then, pardon me, you have this cash and then you allocate out over the future. But if you had just jumped right to the bottom line, you'd see this line that says, what do you mean my cash went down by 37 million? You just told me it went up by 8. This has absolutely everything to do with public sector accounting standards, because the cash is different than your portfolio investments. So your CIBC investments, you put $45 million into those investments. So from a pure cash bucket, it went down by this 45 million. It's not gone. You just changed it from right pocket to left pocket. And you've got a resource to use later on. I just want to jump quickly to, I'm not real good with scroll, there we go. So this is on page, 6 of the statements are 81 of your package here. So this is the portfolio investments. And you can see that the cost is the 45.1 that we just spoke of. And yet the market value is 44.2, so a $900,000 reduction. In our discussion as auditors, our discussion with CIBC in particular said, well, okay, so from a conservative perspective, the value of your investments have gone down. And CIB says, no, okay. These are very unique investments. They're principal protected PPN, principal protected notes. So you're 45 million in, they're saying, I got your back, you got 45 million. Not to worry about it. So I'm just pointing out this piece, even though if you, for whatever reason, you had to liquidate these notes, you'd only get 44.2 before the CIBC kicked in and said, oops, sorry about that, here's your extra $1 million. You'd be back up to your 45. Could be a little confusing, so let me just pause there for a moment. Questions on that? Hearing none, I'll continue on. So with that, I'm going to jump back to your financial position. Oops, jumping apparently way too hard. So we've covered off the operations for the 12 months ended December. So that's the ins and outs over the 12 months. So on your financial position, this is a snapshot at December 31st. Okay. And again, not to go through this, my highlights at this point are, what have you got for net financial assets? You've got a positive 67 million of net financial assets. 15 of that is payable. Sorry, you had 82 million, of assets. You have 15 payable. Hence, you've got a net position of $67 million. Okay. So out of that 67 million, if you shut the doors today, well, if you shut the doors on December 31st and said, okay, we're all out, everyone just go away, nobody gets paid severance, we can fight later, ignoring all that stuff, how long could the county operate with this position? And as you just noticed on your operating position, you had 44 million of expenses and you spent $12 million on capital assets. So for simple math, 50 million bucks, you've got 67, you could operate for a year plus a month and a half. Now don't do the calculations because you're going to get different numbers, okay? But you have about a year of cushion to cover out, to go forward with. And built into that cushion, of course, is the reserves that you were speaking of earlier. That's a ultra conservative approach. Shut the doors, what do we pay? It'll never happen, but I talk about it anyway. Okay, I've hit the other items that I wanted to talk about briefly. So my report, as I mentioned, the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with the accounting standards for public sectors. And it's a clean audit opinion. And I appreciate the opportunity to have spoken to you about that. Reeve?
Any questions for Sean regarding the financial statements? No questions? I will just ask that council go into just a brief closed session with the auditor. I did discuss this with Sean and administration. This is a best practice that has been implemented on some other boards that I sit on. I have no concerns, but if you kind of implement it as a standing practice, then if there ever are concerns that arise, then it's not something out of the ordinary requesting it. It will simply be an opportunity for council to, in a closed session, confirm with the auditor that there was no concerns raised during the audit. So we'll just do that briefly. I'll move us into closed session. All in favor? Motion is carried. And Sean, I apologize. It will just take a minute for us. It's cumbersome because we're still doing sort of a hybrid